Daniel Whitaker, 28, was a quiet, thoughtful man who found true peace where the noise of the city gave way to the rustling of leaves and the distant crackle of a campfire. Daniel wasn't running from life, at least not exactly. But on October 14, 2022, he left something very important behind. That Friday morning, Daniel drove his silver Subaru east, away from the bustle of the city, into the shadow of Mount Rainier. His goal was simple: solitude. Before 10 a.m., he checked in at the ranger's post, exchanged a few polite words with the ranger, and then disappeared into the wilderness, carrying a medium-sized backpack, a Nikon camera, and a folded map with hand-drawn notes. The weather was unusually calm for October, about 18 degrees Celsius, lightly cloudy, and no sign of a storm. Conditions were perfect for a weekend hike. When the ranger asked about his plans, Daniel pointed in the direction of the Ohanpekosh area. No permit was required, just a man walking alone in the woods. That was the last anyone saw of him. When Daniel failed to show up for work the following Monday, his sister Emily sensed something was wrong. He was a meticulous punctuality guy, the kind who texted latecomers 5 times when he was held up at a red light. Her call to his phone went straight to voicemail. She waited an hour, then 3 before filing a missing person report. Authorities found his car parked on a trail near Laughing Water Creek, with no signs of forced entry. Inside were granola bar wrappers, a bottle of water, and a note written on a napkin: "Back Sunday night. Should be quiet." But there was no signal from Daniel's phone. No ping, no distress call, nothing. The search began the next morning with dogs, drones, and thermal imaging. For 3 days, the team combed trails and river banks. Tracks were found near the edge of the trail, but they were lost in the mud. Helicopters surveyed the area. Hikers were interviewed. No one had seen anyone who looked like Daniel. Over the weeks, the speculation shifted from lost hiker to something stranger, more chilling. Because in a forest this vast, silence doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's the loudest warning. Daniel Whitaker didn't chase danger. He sought clarity. As an avid outdoorsman with more than a decade of experience, he respected nature in a way that many weekend adventurers couldn't. He didn't brag, didn't take risks for photos or bragging rights. He carried only the gear he needed and left the rest behind. For Daniel, nature wasn't a battlefield. It was an opportunity to find peace, to shed the noise and weight of modern life. Those who knew him said he was always a little distant, friendly but distant, as if his heart was tuned to a frequency only the trees could hear. After his 5-year relationship ended in the spring of 2022, his friends noticed a change. Daniel stopped posting on social media. He sold his apartment in Tacoma and moved into a studio closer to the foothills. He took photos, mostly of forests, fog, and rare wildlife, but he never shared them with anyone. "I'm just trying to get my head straight," he said one day. No one asked for more details. The trail he chose near Ohanosh was challenging even for experienced hikers, overgrown, crisscrossed with sharp turns that disappeared into brush and knee-straining climbs. But it was beautiful, thick with moss and ancient volcanic boulders. Daniel had hiked it, at least part of it. He mentioned it once at a family dinner, saying he wanted to do the entire route solo before winter set in. He took a lightweight tent, a compact stove, freeze-dried food, and a portable solar charger. He took his Nikon, a notebook, and a knife. There was no satellite phone, but he had never needed one before. Other than the word quiet, he left no instructions. It wasn't a goodbye. It was just Daniel being himself. The thing is, people don't just disappear, not without a trace, not without leaving anything behind. Even animals leave tracks. Even rivers give back what they take. But for 18 months, Daniel Whitaker left nothing. No gear left behind, no campsites used, no body, just a man off the trail and into the unknown. And maybe that was what he wanted. Or maybe there was something waiting for him out there, because when a man like Daniel disappears without a sound, it's not the wind you should fear. It's the thing that moves quieter than the wind. At first, it was just a missed text, then a missed day of work. But by Sunday night, the growing anxiety in Daniel Whitaker's family had turned into something more serious. He'd told his sister Emily he'd be back that evening. He always gave updates on his whereabouts, even if it was just a quick "returned safely." But this time, there was nothing. Monday passed, then Tuesday. The calls went unanswered. The phone went straight to voicemail. By Tuesday morning, a missing persons report had been filed, and a ranger at Rainier National Park, with enough hesitation to suggest he had heard a similar concern before, took the call. Still, procedures were followed. Within 48 hours, a formal search was underway. It began with a targeted search of the area around the Laughing Water Creek trailhead where Daniel's car had been found. Rangers and local volunteers walked in quadrants. Search and rescue dogs were brought in. Helicopters hovered low, using thermal imaging to scan tree canopies and gullies. For 3 days straight, the search widened in neat concentric circles. They looked for anything disturbed. Bushes, gear, clothing, tracks, but found nothing. Not a broken twig, not a scrap of nylon, not even a discarded candy bar wrapper. Daniel seemed to have vanished into the forest, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. By Friday, the tone had changed. What was supposed to be a rescue operation had essentially become an extraction mission. The weather held, but the mood had darkened. The search parties moved more methodically, with a certain sense of dread. They knew the statistics. After 72 hours, the odds of survival in the wilderness were significantly reduced, especially in October. Even with experience, even with gear, Emily refused to accept that. Every morning, she stood at the trailhead with a coffee in one hand and binoculars in the other, watching the trees as if they held a secret they refused to reveal. And perhaps they did, because when the sun set on the 5th day, the mountain was silent, as indifferent as ever, and Daniel Whitaker was still nowhere to be found. The car was locked, untouched, parked neatly at the side of the trail, as if it had been abandoned only moments before. Inside, searchers found Daniel's wallet in the center console and his keys under the passenger seat. On the dashboard was a trekking itinerary laid out in its entirety. 3 red X's marked sections off the main trail, clustered near a ridge known for its sudden weather changes and challenging terrain. It was strange. Daniel hadn't told anyone about these places. Even stranger was the notebook he'd found in the glove compartment, with the last entry broken off mid-sentence. Sometimes I feel like the silence isn't empty. It was just an unfinished thought, but it was the photograph that stopped the ranger in his tracks. A black and white snapshot of Daniel, smiling slightly against a snowy forest backdrop, was tucked between the pages of the notebook. On the back, written in a scraggly hand that no one in his family recognized, were 5 words: "I need to go." Tuh. Whatever it was, this was no longer just a hike. That same day, 2 hikers reported seeing a man who looked like Daniel off the trail the day he disappeared. They hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a lone man picking his way through the trees beyond the switchbacks. His pack hung low, his steps deliberate, heading into the thicker undergrowth. They assumed he knew where he was going, but now those few seconds of observation seemed significant. Had Daniel chosen to leave the trail, or had something drawn him there? The problem wasn't just where he'd gone. It was how completely he'd gone there. Experienced trackers had passed through the area where he'd supposedly been seen. No tracks, no trampled grass, no sign of life or death, just a corridor of trees and a path ending in moss and fog. Whatever happened next, Daniel had crossed an invisible threshold, one from which men never return, one that isn't on any map. For 30 days, they searched through dense forest, across riverbeds, along hidden switchbacks, and up steep slopes where the air grew thin and the moss grew slick. The dogs grew tired. The volunteers, sore and blistered, began to change shifts. The helicopters burned fuel in wide circles, their rotors cutting through the clouds that hung low over the peaks, like secrets the mountain refused to give up. But Daniel Whitaker did not appear. Not in the brush, not by the creeks, not even as a name whispered by hikers who thought they heard footsteps behind them, only to turn and find nothing. Then, on the 14th day, a ranger came across a broken pack strap, caught on a branch deep in a ravine nearly 2 miles from the trailhead. Beneath him, partially buried in the mud, lay the charred remains of a compact stove, the same brand Daniel usually used, but no backpack, no food wrappers, no notebook, no blood, no signs of dragging, just a piece of nylon frayed at the end, as if it had been cut or broken or left there. To the family, that was something. To the search party, not enough. The official park report listed the site as uncertain. No signs of wildlife, no indication of a fall, no human remains. The site had been checked twice before, and both times nothing had been found. Some said it had simply been missed. Others weren't so sure. The forest was playing with them or something. By day 30, with no new leads and no clear direction, the search was called off. The helicopters landed. The dog teams were called off. The forest was too vast, too unruly. The chances of finding anything else, let alone anyone alive, were slim to none. Daniel's case was reclassified as missing, presumed dead. But presumed was a thread his family refused to cut. The first theories trickled quietly onto Reddit threads and travel forums full of weekend adventurers and true crime obsessives. Then came YouTube videos, TikToks, podcasts with names like Missing in the Pines and Rainier's Whispers. They all wanted to know the same thing. What really happened to Daniel Whitaker? Some said he planned it all, that he had decided to disappear, to go underground and never look back. That the breakup, the notebook, the "I gotta go" photograph was not a farewell to the world, but a doorway to another life. Others claimed something darker, a suicide shrouded in solitude, a descent into wilderness-induced psychosis. There were even rumors of murder, a drifter, a rogue ranger in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the theory that kept coming back, whispering like a campfire tale, was a long-standing concern among locals. The Rainier Triangle, a stretch of forest from Paradise to Carbon River, where hikers disappear with eerie frequency. No bodies, no gear, no evidence. Some blamed the extreme weather. Others pointed to unstable terrain and outdated maps. But there were those who spoke of rituals, of lights in the trees, of voices in the fog, of a forest that didn't just hide things but kept them. Daniel's family tried to ignore the noise, but even they couldn't help but wonder. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless. He had everything he needed, and there were people who loved him. Emily, his sister, gave interviews saying he was out of his mind but not suicidal. His mother admitted he was searching for something. Peace, meaning something bigger than himself, something he might have hoped he'd find in the silence between the trees. But if he found it, he never came back to tell them what it was. After the search was over, the silence didn't go away. It stretched, it lingered, it lodged itself in the bones of everyone who knew Daniel Whitaker, curling into the corners of their lives like a fog that refused to clear. His mother stopped waiting on the porch for letters. Emily deleted his number from her phone but saved the last voicemail. Every now and then, someone would post on a forum. Any news on the Rainier hikers? But the thread would die down as quickly as it had appeared. Meanwhile, Mount Rainier had a life of its own. Snow fell, snow melted, seasons changed, trails closed and opened. Hikers returned with cameras and backpacks, unaware that they were walking the same forests that had swallowed a man whole. Daniel's file was tucked neatly into a box marked cold, among other names that had faded from public memory. For a while, it seemed like things would stay that way. Then, in March 2024, another hiker disappeared. A lone hiker named Lucas Ryren, age 32, never returned from a trip near Moik Lake. Same profile, same general area, same result, no tracks, no clues, just silence. The rangers pulled out Daniel's file again, wondering if the two cases might be connected. They reviewed old notes, compared overlapping GPS grids, reread witness statements. It was déjà vu, just as empty, until May arrived. It was early in the season. The trails were still muddy and there was snow at higher elevations. Two experienced climbers, friends from Seattle, were heading out for a weekend to climb a cliff near Toley Peak, a jagged, quiet corner of the park where few people ventured off route. They weren't looking for anything out of the ordinary, just new routes and clean holds. But as they rounded a rocky outcrop, a sharp, sour smell caught their attention, at first faint, then unmistakable. They followed it to a patch of pines where the wind barely moved, and there, high in the trees, swaying gently in the mountain breeze, was a shape. Too big to be an animal, too tall to be natural, too human to ignore. At first, they thought it might be a dropped pack, perhaps gear caught in a storm or abandoned by another climber. But as they approached, ropes taut, boots creaking on loose rock, they saw the truth. It wasn't gear, it wasn't an animal, it was a body hanging nearly 10 meters above the ground, caught in the high fork of two trees like a forgotten puppet. The smell was stronger now, sweet, rotting, with a sour edge. One of the climbers turned away and vomited. The other stared, stunned at the tangle of limbs and rope and dark cloth. The body was thin, withered, but whole. The cold weather and the high altitude had preserved it like a twisted relic. The clothes were faded, but still intact. The skin was darker, but like leather, stretched taut over a jaw frozen in what might have been a scream. No visible injuries, no sign of attack, just hanging. The climbers reported it. The rangers arrived that evening and cordoned off the area. The extraction was a delicate operation. Winches, a helicopter lift. The rangers documented every inch, every angle. And though they said nothing at the time, they knew as soon as they saw the hiking boots, the jacket with the missing strap, the brand of stove Daniel used, the old Nikon still hanging from his mummified shoulder. It was Daniel Whitaker. 18 months after he had vanished without a trace, he had reappeared in a place no one had looked for. In a position no one could explain, hanging from the trees, as if the forest itself had picked him up and forgotten to put him down. And that was just the beginning. It didn't take long to confirm what the rangers already suspected. The remains found high in the pines at Toley Peak were Daniel Whitaker. The dental records were the first match. DNA sealed it. His mother cried when she was told. Emily stared at the officer, blinking in silence, as if she couldn't decide whether to collapse or scream. The closure had finally arrived, but it wasn't the one anyone wanted. The condition of the body raised more questions than it answered. He was still wearing the same field jacket and pants he'd left home in, but his boots were missing. His legs were bare, weathered from exposure to the elements, his toes curled as if they'd clenched at the last moment. Even stranger, his hands were bound loosely, not tightly, as if whoever had bound them didn't want him to run away, but didn't care if he did. The paracord wasn't tied in any way that would withstand a real fight. It was symbolic, a gesture or a message. Beneath the tree, neatly laid out on a patch of flattened moss, were two items: Daniel's driver's license and his cell phone. The phone was dead, its screen cracked, its battery long dead. But its position directly beneath the body, centered and untouched, seemed deliberate. It was as if someone had arranged it, a silent signature. It was him. There were no drag marks, no scratches in the bark, no sign of being raised or fallen. Just the body, the ligaments, and the items, arranged at the base with clinical precision. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as strangulation consistent with hanging, but the method was undetermined. Suicide, murder, staged accident. None of it fit perfectly, and nothing in Daniel's past explained why he was here, high above the ground, posing like a victim the forest was tired of keeping. Whatever had happened to Daniel, it hadn't happened by accident, and it hadn't happened alone. The tree was an old Douglas fir, nearly 40 meters tall, its bark polished by wind and age. Its lower branches were sparse and high above the ground, with no holds, no low branches from which to begin their climb. The investigators examined it carefully, walking around, measuring, trying to understand how a man with no climbing gear had ended up suspended 10 meters above the ground. There were no ropes or carabiners nearby, no sign of a ladder, no disturbed ground where someone could have planted something. The body had not been lifted from above through the canopy. It was too dense for any aerial access, even with modern equipment, and wind had no chance. No storm, no natural event could have carried a grown man so high and wedged him perfectly between the branches. The angles did not match. The body had not been entangled. It had been placed. The location was remote. So remote that even seasoned rangers admitted they had never been to the ledge. The path to it was steep, unmarked, and in places nearly vertical. Not a place to get lost, which begged the question, why here? Why that tree? The area around the ledge showed no signs of camp, no dead fires, no debris, no gear. It was as if Daniel had been carried there, not necessarily physically, but drawn, as if something or someone had brought him to that precise spot for a reason that defied logic or explanation. A place invisible to aerial searches, a place few would ever think to look for. One ranger, who asked not to be named, said quietly, "It's like the forest was holding him until it decided to let him go." Another simply described it as it felt. Impossible. There was no way Daniel could have gotten there on his own, but there was no evidence that anyone else had helped. No footprints, no alien DNA, no answers. Just a tree, a body, and a mystery suspended in midair, still hanging there long after the search was over. Daniel Whitaker had been dead for more than a year by the time he was found, but the altitude and cold had preserved him in a way that baffled even the most seasoned investigators. His body was mummified. Skin like leather stretched taut over his bones, his eye sockets long gone but his eyeballs intact. His limbs, though stiff, had not fallen apart. He appeared posed, his arms hanging unnaturally symmetrically at his sides, as if they had been positioned with intent, as if the end had not simply come, but been arranged. The official cause of death, after the coroner's report, was asphyxiation consistent with hanging. No sign of a struggle, no blunt force trauma, no fractures other than the ones around his neck. It was a classic hanging, except for everything that wasn't. For starters, his boots. They weren't on his feet, and they weren't scattered around, as if they'd been taken off in a panic. Instead, they were found at the base of a tree, neatly placed side by side, perfectly aligned, facing due north. They weren't muddy or torn, they weren't dropped. They were placed there, carefully, with intent. It's the detail that doesn't appear in the autopsy report, but it's the one detectives remember best. Then there was the paracord, loosely wrapped around his wrists, more as a symbol than a restraint, and his ID and phone were tucked neatly underneath him, as if someone wanted him to be found, not right away, but eventually. No animal bites, no insect damage, no evidence that scavengers had disturbed the scene. It was as if nature itself had decided to leave him untouched, protected, preserved. But preserved for what? That question lingered in the mind of the lead investigator, who later said, "I've seen a lot of things here in the woods. But this was wrong, like it was waiting for us." And perhaps it was, because the strangest thing about it wasn't the body. It was what they'd found above him, tucked between the branches, like a secret no one was going to keep. A junior ranger had spotted it, just a corner of plastic sticking out of the crook of a branch, gleaming dully in the late afternoon light. She'd climbed into the middle of the tree, careful not to disturb the dangling body, and withdrew the object. A Ziploc bag, darkened and fogged with age, but sealed. Inside were 6 tattered, yellowed pages, water-stained and written in Daniel's unmistakable, choppy handwriting. The first page was dated October 15th, 2022, just a day after he'd disappeared. "I heard them again last night," it began. No context, no explanation, just a sentence, as if he were continuing something that was already in motion. On another page it read, "The trees watch. Not all of them, just the tall ones, the ones that never move, even when the wind blows." There were drawings, 2 rough sketches of distorted limbs and wide, dark eyes. One looked like a man, but distorted. The arms were too long. The mouth was a jagged black void. Beneath it, Daniel had written, "Not a man. Never was." Another note. "This is not a place you go to. It is a place that finds you. I thought I came here, but I was led." From there, the handwriting became harder to read, more slanted, uneven. The ink was smudged, as if written in panic. "They do not like the light," one page read. "They wait for the mind to open." The last page was almost blank. Only one line read, "If you find this, it's too late." The diary was turned over to the FBI. They ran forensic tests, fingerprints, DNA, the composition of the ink. All confirmed that it belonged to Daniel. No other prints, no foreign substances, just Daniel's voice, growing more cracked with each line, slipping into something beyond fear, beyond sanity. Emily read the pages once, then refused to look at them again. "It wasn't my brother in the end," she said. "Something changed him, or something affected him." And maybe that was true. That Daniel had gone looking for silence, but he had found something else. Something that could wait. Something that knew where he would be. In the days following the discovery of Daniel Whitaker's body, investigators and forensic experts gathered in a locked room to analyze everything they had. Photographs, reports, diary pages, autopsy results. They had a complete picture, but none of it made sense. The conclusions read like contradictions. No obvious signs of foul play, no forensic evidence of assault, no defensive wounds, no foreign DNA, and yet no one could explain how a man with no climbing gear had ended up hanging 30 feet in the air, barefoot, and with his hands bound like a mannequin in some kind of ritualistic display. The position of the body, they said, was consistent with suicide. Of that they could be sure. But everything else, the neatly folded clothes, the flimsy ropes around his wrists, the journal pages hidden high above his head, suggested the presence of someone or something else. The evidence did not point to murder, nor did it fit the mold of mental illness. Daniel's family insisted he was not suicidal, and though his journal entries grew darker, they were not hopeless. He was scared, terrified, as if he believed he was being hunted, watched by something inhuman, something that knew the area better than he did. Why had he taken off his shoes? Why had he positioned them so precisely, facing north? Why had he bound his wrists so loosely, as if inviting someone or something to finish the job? The theories poured in. Cult activity, a reclusive hermit, an encounter with a cryptid. Some even returned to the Rainier Triangle theory, noting the pattern of disappearances in the same geographic cluster. But none of the theories could explain the surgical precision of the scene or the lack of mistakes. No tracks, no drags, no misses. Just Daniel alone, tied up, hanging like an unsolved question the woods had kept for too long. In the end, the case had no suspects, no motive, no timeline that made sense. It was the kind of mystery that scars not just a family, but everyone who tried to solve it. Because the only thing worse than finding a body is finding one that tells you nothing. The official conclusion came 2 weeks later. Cause of death: undetermined. It was the only field they could fill out. Suicide could not be confirmed, homicide could not be proven. And accident? No one could explain how it happened, so they left it open. A blank in a case that was now sealed, but never truly closed. Daniel Whitaker's death added to a growing list of disappearances in and around Mount Rainier. Stories that began the same way and ended without any closure. But for the people who lived near the park, the stories did not end with the paperwork. Whispers began to circulate around town again. Old rumors were reawakened. Hikers reported strange sounds near Tule Peak, clicks and hums in the trees, like whispers in a language no one understood. Others spoke of low lights flickering between the trees, always just out of reach. And some, especially the old-timers, said it bluntly: "This part of the mountain doesn't like to be disturbed." The forest was changing, restless. In the months since Daniel's body was found, 2 more lone hikers had disappeared in the same quadrant. Both experienced, both healthy, both like Daniel, traveling alone. Search parties had found nothing, not even a broken twig. And yet the trailhead remains open. People continue to walk, drawn by the beauty, the silence, the idea that the wilderness still holds something pure. But the locals avoid it. They don't go near Tule Peak anymore. Not after what they found hanging in that tree. Emily doesn't visit the park. She says she can't. "He took my brother," she told reporters, "and I don't think he got him back." Some mysteries are solved, others are carried around. Daniel's story is the latter. Not a puzzle to be solved, but a wound to be walked around. A reminder that nature isn't always forgiving. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes, when you've wandered too far into the woods, it notices. There are places in the world that defy explanation. Quiet places where logic blurs at the edges and the usual rules don't seem to apply. Mount Rainier is one of them, still there, shrouded in mist and myth. It doesn't roar or rage. It waits. For what? No one can say. But after Daniel Whitaker disappeared, after he was found hanging like a question in the trees, even the most skeptical of the search parties admitted that something about that part of the woods felt wrong. Not evil, just deliberate. Daniel left no confession, no grand message, no trail of clues leading to any revelation about his state of mind. What he left behind was more disturbing. Symbols, fragments, fear. A man who entered the woods seeking clarity and left behind only riddles. The journal pages do not explain his death. They deepen the mystery. His gear was not scattered. It was neatly folded. His final act did not scream desperation. It whispered of purpose. But whose? There's a special kind of silence in the deep wilderness. It doesn't soothe. It presses. It watches. Perhaps Daniel felt it before anyone else. Perhaps he tried to write it down and found that words couldn't do justice to what he saw or heard or felt. Or perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was suicide, distorted by surreal distortions of time and weather. Perhaps the forest had nothing to do with it, but that's the thing about places like Rainier. Certainty is the first thing to go. The mountain takes its time. It takes its time. It erases slowly, gently, until all that's left is an outline, an echo of footsteps that enter but never leave. And in that space between knowing and not knowing, we're left wondering. Was something taken by Daniel? Or did he find something he couldn't return from? The files are closed. The search is over. But the questions remain, buried deep in the roots and riverbeds of the mountain, waiting for the next name. Because the forest doesn't need to move to get to you. It just needs you to come a little closer. Sometimes the mountain doesn't take you. It waits for you to come back. That story was intense. But this story on the right is even crazier.